I was sitting in the corner of the room holding a rosary in one hand and a blanket I had made for my grandson in the other. My daughter-in-law was in labor and I was praying. Then my son came in, tense, and said in a firm voice, "Mom, leave, only her family matters now." It felt like a slap to the soul. I stood there stunned. But that night I broke the silence. And what I revealed no one in that room would ever forget. I've always been the one who wakes up first and goes to bed last. The one who knows where things are even when no one remembers losing them. I set the table with careful dish towels like it's a silent dance. I grew up believing that serving was a form of love, and for a long time that's how I saw my place in the world. Some people live for the spotlight, others choose the wings. I chose them not out of fear, but because I believe there's strength in those who hold up the show from behind the curtain. I remember a family party where the music stopped out of nowhere. Everyone looked around confused, but I was already behind the speaker fixing the cord. I went back to the kitchen without anyone noticing. I got used to that. The silence of recognition, but the certainty that my touch was in everything. And even without applause I felt useful. When you understand the beauty of what no one sees, the invisible becomes home. But time takes its toll. And one day even the strongest get tired of being forgotten. Motherhood taught me that. Giving without expecting, but also carrying the weight of not being asked. Ethan, my son, was always the center of my care. I spent hours preparing his school lunches even when I was exhausted from work. He smiled, ate, and ran off. I'd sit there staring at the empty plate. I never asked for a thank you, but over time I wanted to be more than support. I wanted to be a good memory. I wanted him to know that there was more than food on that plate. There was faith, courage, dignity. Deep down I knew silence has its limits. We don't realize how long we've been quiet until we need to shout and can't find our voice. It's not about drama, it's about exhaustion. And when you spend a lifetime backstage, you start to believe it's wrong to want the stage. But it's not. The mistake is forgetting that even those who give need to receive. That even those who never asked for anything eventually break. And I broke. Not all at once, but slowly. Like a glass that cracks without anyone noticing. If I'm telling you this, it's because it's time to speak. To say that there's strength in those who suffer quietly, but there's also life in those who finally speak. Silence taught me a lot, but it was my voice, the one that took decades to find, that changed everything. And if you think it's too late to be seen, just wait and see what happens when you step out of the corner. I still remember the day Ethan told me about Juliana. His eyes lit up the way only love can do. And I, even with a tight heart, smiled. Not out of obligation, but out of love. I was raised to believe a mother welcomes even when she doesn't understand. So I opened my doors and my heart. I helped however I could. I arranged flowers, wiped chairs, sewed details on the dress with my own hands. It was my way of saying I'm with you. I never liked being the center of attention. While others were getting dressed for the event, I was worried about the tablecloths and whether the glasses were lined up. I stood for hours, sometimes with back pain, but always smiling. Because to me, love means serving without noise. I remember spending an entire night gluing fabric flowers. And the next day no one noticed. But that was okay. Real love doesn't wait for applause. It just wants to help. Juliana was polite but distant. We were never close, but there was respect. And I held on to that like a mom clings to her child's first drawing on the fridge. I saw her as a chance to grow the family, not lose my place in it. And even though her gestures were cold, I kept trying. I offered help, asked if she needed anything, even knowing the answer would be no thank you. Still, my hope was simple: to stay close, even if only at the edge. During the preparations, I felt alive. It was like going back in time to when I planned Ethan's 7th birthday. I did everything with the same care: handmade labels, neat bows, pans cleaned with vinegar. But this time it was for someone who might never see me as part of the story. That hurt. But I swallowed that pain with the same tea I've had for years: hope. And I carried on. Because where there's love, there's still a chance for a miracle. The wedding was in a bright hall full of people. They looked beautiful. I sat in the back row in a simple dress and low shoes. My heart was full of joy, but also a strange emptiness. Like being at a party you helped plan but were never officially invited to, and still I clapped. Because being a mom means knowing when to step back even when you want to stay. Juliana never had warm smiles or sweet words. She always kept a polite distance, like someone holding an umbrella on a sunny day. I tried to get close slowly, respecting her pace. I brought cakes, asked about her job, offered to help with small things. Sometimes she said yes, sometimes nothing. But there was peace still. A quiet truce between two women trying to share the same love. Ethan When I found out she was pregnant, the world stopped. I cried alone in the kitchen, holding a wooden spoon. It felt like God was whispering, "It's your time." I imagined everything. The baby clothes, the crib, the smell of the baby on my apron. I saw myself singing lullabies, changing diapers, offering soup in little bowls. It wasn't vanity. It was a dream. A deep desire to be a present grandmother with faith and courage to start over. I told my sister over the phone, "This is it. I'm finally going to be called in." And she replied bluntly, "Be careful, Martha. Not everyone sees love the same way." I laughed because I didn't want to hear it. But a part of me already suspected the dream might be mine alone. Still, I kept preparing everything. Because when you love, you don't wait for guarantees. You just love. I bought a little notebook and started writing recipes, tips, stories I wanted to share with the baby. Each page was a piece of the legacy I hoped to leave behind, not of money but of soul. Because being a grandma to me was more than a title. It was a chance to be a voice, a reference, a foundation. A friend told me, "You're getting too excited." And I, with a heart bursting, said, "It's not excitement. It's hope." Despite the distance between me and Juliana, I believed the baby would change things. A baby changes everything. Breaks down walls, opens doors. This was my chance to be part of the story again, this time with a name, a voice, a place in the picture. But what I didn't know yet is that not every birth brings people together. Some reveal what's been broken all along. I picked the fabric for the blanket like choosing a secret to keep in my heart. Soft sky blue, just like I imagined his eyes would be. I stitched his initials with strong thread because I wanted it to last for years. Each stitch was a piece of my story sewn into his future. It wasn't just a gift. It was presence. It was love in fabric made quietly, but screaming everything I felt. While I sewed, I also stocked the freezer. Pumpkin soup, beet chicken with vegetables. I washed the containers, labeled them with dates, even thought about adding little drawings. I wasn't trying to intrude, just trying to be ready. To show I was there, prepared. My faith has always come through actions. And cooking for me is a prayer. It's how I say I love you without saying a word. I went to the pharmacy, bought diapers, wipes, creams, put together a care kit with all the love in the world. I had done this when Ethan was born. But now it was different. This was for a baby who wasn't even here yet but already filled my heart. I did it all with dignity, like preparing the house for a sacred visitor. Because to me, that's what he would be, sacred. Every time I saw the bag ready in the corner of the room, my heart beat faster. I was scared too. Scared of not being called. Scared of being forgotten. But I pretended I wasn't. Pretended everything was fine. That being a mother was enough to guarantee a place as a grandmother. And maybe that was my biggest mistake, believing blood ties were all that mattered. Back then, I'd wake up early and talk to myself while stirring the coffee. "Will it work out?" I'd ask. And I'd answer, "Yes, it will, Martha, have faith." Sometimes hope is the only thing keeping you going. And in that house full of frozen meals and stored up love, I waited for the big day like waiting for a miracle. The phone rang in the middle of the night. Ethan said Juliana was heading to the hospital. My heart nearly jumped out of my chest. I threw on the first coat I saw, put the blanket in the bag, and grabbed the rosary like it was my grandma badge. I left in a rush, but quietly, like someone walking fast, trying not to make noise. When I arrived, the hospital lights gave me a nervous chill I hadn't felt in years. I was about to live what I had waited for so long. I walked in and found a quiet spot. I didn't want to bother anyone, I just needed to be there. Found a chair in the corner, sat down, and started praying softly like I used to when Ethan got sick or lost a toy. Every beat of the rosary was a prayer for them, not for me. Faith becomes a shield in those moments. And I felt strong even though I was shaking inside. Because courage is feeling fear and showing up anyway. I saw Juliana being wheeled past, eyes tight with pain. My instinct was to go to her, but I held back. Mothers know when to stop. Grandmothers learn too. My eyes filled with tears, but I smiled. It was a crooked smile, I know. The kind that hides a storm behind a calm face. But it was real. I just wanted to be there, rooting for her, for the baby, for everything to go well. I still believed that moment would bring us closer. In that white hospital hallway, I remembered Ethan's birth. The smell of hospital soap, the warmth I felt holding him for the first time. It was like reliving it all. Except this time from the outside. And still my heart swelled with hope. Because even silent presence is still love. I didn't want the spotlight. I just wanted to be part of the story. Even if only in the margins. While I waited, a nurse passed by and asked if I was with the patient. I smiled and said I'm his mother. She nodded and walked on. No one asked me to leave. No one called me in. I stayed right there between prayers, between anxiety and pride. And in that space between, something inside me began to shift. As if the silence that once felt safe was starting to weigh too much. He appeared out of nowhere at the end of the hallway. His face, I'll never forget. Tense shoulders, eyes lost. I stood up thinking he was coming to hug me, to give me news. But no. He stopped a few steps away and didn't even look me in the eye. Time froze. And before I could say anything, he dropped the words like stones. Each syllable a rejection. Mom, leave, only her family matters now. My world fell apart in seconds. I stood frozen, holding the bag with the blanket. It felt like the floor had vanished. The courage that brought me there broke in two. I wanted to ask why, I wanted to understand. But my throat closed. I just blinked, trying to hold back tears. How can a son forget who taught him to love? He didn't yell. But it hurt more than if he had. It was the coldness, the exclusion, the way he said her family, like I was no longer anything. I felt like I had walked into a forbidden place. And to think all I wanted was to see my grandson born. That's when I understood even the strongest love can be pushed away. Even the most present mother can be erased by one act of rejection. My hand clutched the rosary, but my whole body trembled. I saw others walk by, life going on, babies being born, and I stood there, shut out of the story I helped build. A janitor even asked if I was okay. I nodded, but inside I was screaming. Because it's not just pain. It's humiliation. A silent betrayal that slips in without warning and leaves invisible scars. And the cruelest part is that he didn't even notice the pain. He went back into the room like nothing happened. Maybe he thought he was right. Maybe he was confused. I don't know. What I do know is that there in that cold hallway, I learned that dignity is also knowing when to leave. But leave with your head high, even when your heart is in pieces. When he finished speaking, it took me a few seconds to react. It was like my body refused to move, like my soul was still trying to understand what had just happened. I stood up slowly, no rush, like someone trying not to break anything, even though I was already broken inside. The blanket was still in my hands, folded soft, filled with intention, but now it felt heavy. As if every stitch was a reminder that I wasn't chosen. That hallway, which had once felt narrow, turned into a desert. Every step echoed too loud. My eyes burned, but I didn't want to cry there. There was something sacred about my pain, and it didn't deserve to be on display. I passed an older woman waiting outside the maternity ward. She smiled at me without knowing. And that small gesture was the only light in that dark walk. Sometimes it's in a stranger's gaze that we find shelter. I didn't say a word. Not because there was nothing to say, but because speaking would have felt like trying to fix shattered glass with tape. I chose silence, but not the same silence as before, not the kind that comes from submission. This was a silence of mourning, of something that ended before it ever really began. A kind of loss you can't explain. Like my place in that story had been ripped away without a chance to say goodbye. When I stepped outside, the sun was just starting to rise. Ironic, right? Just as everything in me went dark, the day was beginning out there. I sat on a bench near the entrance and took a deep breath. For the first time, I felt like I didn't belong. Like that world, that hospital, that story had pushed me out. And as much as it hurt, something deep inside whispered, you'll rise again. I wiped my face, adjusted the bag, and started walking slowly. Every step was a goodbye. To the hope, the dream, the image I had of what it would be like to be a grandmother. The blanket was still with me. I didn't have the heart to leave it there. Maybe because deep down I still believed it deserved to be given. Even if my love had been rejected, it was still real. I got home and dropped the keys on the table harder than I meant to. The sound echoed in the empty room. I sat in the armchair, still wearing my coat, the blanket in my lap. I stared at the ceiling, trying to hold back the inevitable. The tears came before I noticed. It was like my body finally said it's okay now. Crying wasn't just about pain. It was a silent scream from someone who had lost solid ground. I reached for the rosary like I had on so many hard days. The beads slipped through my fingers as my mind screamed unanswered questions. Where did I go wrong? Did he forget everything I lived for him? This pain wasn't just from tonight. It was built up over years. A collection of silences, sacrifices, betrayals masked as choices. And the worst part, feeling like, after all this time, I no longer belonged. I felt like a book forgotten on the shelf. Once read, once needed, now just gathering dust. I spent years giving everything, thinking love was enough. Thinking being there was enough. My faith held my soul together in that moment, but even it was shaking. Because when you give too much without being seen, you start to disappear. And that night, I felt invisible. I remembered when Ethan fell off his bike and scraped his knee. He was 7. He hugged me crying, saying, "Mom, no one takes care of me like you do." And now that same boy had cast me aside with a cold sentence. The contrast hurt more than the rejection. It felt like my entire history had been erased suddenly without warning, like a scribble wiped off a new page. I stayed there for hours. Not out of anger, but from a deep emptiness. The kind of pain that doesn't scream but eats away at you. I didn't want revenge or answers. I just wanted to understand how a lifetime of love could turn into a burden in a second. And in the silence of that house, I started to realize maybe it was time to break my own. The house was drenched in thick silence, the kind where even the ticking of the clock feels like judgment. I couldn't sleep. The rosary wasn't enough anymore. I picked up the phone, hands trembling, and dialed my sister's number. We hadn't really talked in months. She answered with a groggy voice, worried, thinking it was an emergency. And it was an emergency of the soul. I just said I need to talk to someone who knows me. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Go ahead, Martha, I'm here." And it was like opening a floodgate. The words poured out raw, unfiltered. I told her about the hospital, the blanket, Ethan's words, the emptiness that followed. Then breathless, I broke down. You know, when you feel like you don't belong, not as a mom, not even as a person. My voice cracked. On the other end, I heard her take a long breath. My sister was always tougher than me. Not the type to cry easily, but the type who really listens. And in that moment, she didn't try to comfort me with cliches. She didn't say it'll pass or he'll regret it. She just listened. And being heard when your soul is bleeding is the first real miracle. I surprised myself with how brave I felt just opening up. After all the years spent holding everything and speaking felt revolutionary. Then she said it firmly, "Martha, sometimes what kills isn't rejection. It's silence. Maybe it's time you speak. With truth, with dignity." Her words cut deep, but in the way a scalpel does to heal. I stayed quiet, just feeling it. And I realized, yes, my strength was still there, buried in a place I had forgotten. It was time to go get it back. The call didn't last long, but it was enough to remind me who I was. That before being a mom, I was a woman. That before caring for others, I had dreams too. And that despite everything, I still had faith. A faith that survived the pain. And now even hurt could still carry me back to the truth. Her words kept echoing in my head. Silence kills more than rejection. Funny how even though I've always valued quiet, I never thought of it like that. I always saw silence as refuge. But now it felt more like a prison. I'd spent so long swallowing my words, I didn't even notice how much of myself had vanished. It's not just about not speaking. It's about not existing in your own story. She added, "You don't have to scream or fight. You just have to show who you are." That stayed with me. Because deep down I didn't want revenge. I just wanted to be remembered. I wanted my grandson to know he was loved long before he was born. That the faith I carried came from a real story filled with pain, yes, but also strength, dignity, miracles. I thought about all the times I stayed quiet to avoid conflict. Like at Ethan's 10th birthday when he wanted the party at Juliana's parents' house. I smiled, helped with the snacks, and didn't say a word, just to avoid being inconvenient. And there, years later, I realized how much I had shrunk myself just to keep peace. The courage I lacked back then was now knocking on the door of my heart. That's when I understood speaking up isn't disrespect. It's self-respect. I could stand up for myself without losing who I was. I could love without silencing myself. My sister's words lit something inside me. And when a woman wakes up to her own truth, the world around her has to shift. Because you can't keep fitting into spaces that were never made for you. You have to make your own. That night alone in the living room, I didn't cry anymore. It was like my tears had dried up to make room for resolve. I took a deep breath, looked at the folded blanket, and thought, I won't let it end like this. Not without leaving my truth behind. And right there in the dark, an idea was born that would change everything. I woke up early, but not like before. There was something new in me. A kind of strength that didn't need to shout, but held everything up. I took a slow shower, picked out a simple outfit, and brushed my hair with care. It wasn't vanity, it was respect. For me, for everything I had done in silence. I looked in the mirror, and for the first time in a long time, I saw a whole woman. One who cried, who fell, but who chose to rise with dignity. I grabbed the bag with the blanket, the rosary, and an envelope. I wrote the letter slowly before leaving. The words came as if they had been waiting all along, just needing my permission. My hands didn't shake. I didn't hesitate. I just wrote. Because sometimes the truth grows so heavy inside us it can't stay unspoken. It needs to act. It needs to move. To reach someone. I walked to the hospital slowly but steadily. I entered through the same doors as the night before. The same halls, the same walls, but now I was someone else. I wasn't there to beg for space or ask for permission. I came to show up.
as a mother,
as a grandmother, as a woman who loves but also knows her worth. At the front desk, I said calmly, "I'd like to leave something with the nurse, please." She looked at me surprised and said, "Of course, ma'am." I handed her the bag like I was handing over a piece of my heart. I asked that the envelope be given to Ethan when he was alone. I didn't want an audience. Just the truth, delivered quietly. I walked out of the hospital in silence, but it was a different kind of silence. A silence full of voice. Because sometimes strength is in not shouting. It's in calmly saying I exist. And the love I built cannot be erased like that. The letter started with "Dear Grandson," because it was for him. Even if he couldn't understand the words yet, I needed him to know. To feel it. That envelope held more than paper. It held memory, love, forgiveness. It held a grandmother trying to be part of his story, even from afar. I included the blanket folded neatly, still smelling of lavender. The rosary was the last item. It had been with me for years. It had seen my tears, my prayers, my sleepless nights, and now it was going with him. A symbolic but sacred gift. One that carried faith, courage, and the hope that one day that child would understand what was done here. With love and dignity. The letter said, "I don't know if I'll be there on your birthdays, but know that your grandma has loved you since before you were born." And that was the truth. Because a grandmother's love starts before the first ultrasound. It starts in the dream, in the stitching, in the soup made with care. In the unseen presence that supports even without being seen. I also wrote, "If one day you hear a story where I don't appear, remember silent love is still real love." Because I knew I could be erased. That in many versions my name might not be spoken, but that letter would be living proof. That I was there. That I loved. That I tried. I handed it all over with peace, and left the hospital with a lighter heart. For the first time, I didn't wait for a response. I just wanted my truth to reach where spoken words never could. The pen moved slowly across the paper like every word carried the weight of a lifetime. My handwriting wasn't pretty, but it was steady. Steady like I felt. I didn't write with bitterness. I wrote with faith. With the certainty that love, even when ignored, still holds power. The beginning was the hardest. How do you explain absence before it happens? I took a breath and began, "Dear Grandson," and my heart already ached. The words came like opening an old chest. I wrote about love, about courage, but also about forgiveness. I didn't blame anyone because it wasn't a letter of accusation. It was a letter of presence even in absence. If one day you hear a story where I don't appear, that part hurt. Because I knew it could happen. They were already trying to erase me. But I wouldn't let silence be my only legacy. Writing that letter brought back memories of Ethan. The sleepless nights when he had fevers, the drawings we taped to the fridge, the scoldings followed by hugs. All of it was between the lines. Because real love isn't just present. It carries history, roots, a past. And that's what I wanted to leave my grandson, an invisible thread of affection, even if the world tried to cut it. I remembered my grandmother as I wrote. She didn't show up in many pictures either, but she taught me how to bake bread, how to care for others, and how to honor my own pain. I'll never forget her saying, "True love plants, even in dry soil." And that's what I did. I planted love in that envelope, knowing it might take time to bloom, but trusting that someday it would. When I folded the letter, a tear fell onto the paper. I thought about starting over, but decided to leave it. That drop was part of the story too. It was real. And the truth, when mixed with emotion, holds more power than any beautiful word ever could. I looked into the nurse's eyes and asked calmly, "Please give this to him when he's alone." She nodded respectfully as if she understood the weight of the moment. It was just an envelope, but it felt like the world. Not from sadness, but from meaning. I left the hospital with lighter steps, even though my heart was still pounding. The air felt clearer. The light seemed brighter. It was as if I had finally seen myself as a woman beyond being a mother. I sat for a minute on the sidewalk, letting the wind hit my face. I didn't think about answers or reactions. For the first time, my peace didn't depend on anyone's approval. I had done what was right, with truth, with dignity, and that was enough. The strength I thought I had lost was now alive in every gesture. It was like I had finally come home to myself. I sat and watched the people go by. Women coming and going from the hospital, nervous fathers, kids running. It all looked like a movie, and I thought, how many stories are happening all at once? How many mothers feel invisible in silence? That made me want to speak more, to share my story, to make sure other women wouldn't stay quiet as long as I did. I got home, took off my shoes, and put water on to boil. I made chamomile tea, but I didn't even need to finish it. Peace was already inside me. Not the peace of winning an argument, but the peace of staying true to myself. For the first time in a long time, I looked in the mirror without guilt, without feeling small. I saw myself whole. And that alone was already a miracle. I picked up my rosary, held it tight, and gave thanks. I didn't ask her anything, just thanked. For the courage to go, for the strength to come back, for the hope that maybe that letter would change something, or at least plant a seed. The phone rang, and for a second my heart stopped. It was him, Ethan. I took a deep breath before answering. "Hello," I said softly. On the other end, he didn't answer right away. I just heard him crying. And in that sob, my heart broke and healed all at once. "Mom, I read it," he said, his voice cracking like a little boy asking for comfort. Through the tears, he said, "I don't know what came over me. I let myself get carried away." His words hit me deep. Not out of anger, but relief. He had read it. He had felt it. When I saw the blanket, I remembered everything. "You taking care of me when I was little." I closed my eyes and let the emotion in. It was the miracle I had prayed for in silence. His voice trembled, and that said more than any explanation. "I'm sorry, Mom." And I forgave him. In that moment, all the pain I had been carrying melted away. Because sometimes what we need isn't justice. It's recognition. To know the truth reached someone. That love wasn't invisible. I remembered a time when he was little and broke a vase. He came to me crying, asking for forgiveness, and I hugged him. And now, all these years later, it was happening again. But this time it was his soul asking for forgiveness. And even though I was still hurting, I just wanted to hold him. Because a mother's love does that, it heals even before it hurts. I couldn't say much over the phone. I just cried with him. Sometimes the response we've been waiting for doesn't come in words, but in tears. And his were real. In that moment, I understood my presence was still there, still alive in him. He told me he couldn't wait. As soon as he got the envelope, he went into the bedroom and sat on the floor. It was the middle of the night. The house was quiet. The lamp was the only thing on. He opened it slowly, like he knew he was about to face something he couldn't ignore anymore. He read every word with his head down. And when he finished, the tears came like a flood. I cried, Mom. I couldn't stop. He told me like it was a confession. I pictured him on the floor, the blanket in his lap, the letter in his hands. A grown man remembering the child I once held up. It shook me. Because sometimes love only hits when it becomes something you can hold in fabric and paper, in a gesture. Then he said, still choked up, "Juliana, read it too." She got emotional. My chest tightened. I hadn't expected that. But knowing the truth reached her gave me hope. Maybe this story could still be rewritten. Maybe the woman who once saw me as distant could now see me differently. He said she stayed quiet for a while with tears in her eyes. She said she never stopped to think how you felt. Those words were healing. They didn't erase the pain, but they softened it. Recognition doesn't change the past, but it clears the way for the future. And in that moment, I began to believe the miracle I had prayed for was unfolding. It wasn't a hug yet. It wasn't full presence, but it was a beginning, the start of healing. The first step across a new bridge. And it all started with courage. The courage not to disappear. The courage to speak with love, with truth, with faith. That evening, the phone rang again. His voice was calmer now, but full of emotion. "Mom, can you come to the hospital?" My heart jumped. I got ready in silence, my hands shaking, my heart full of faith. But this time it wasn't the silence of rejection. It was a silence filled with hope. I left the house with an empty bag but a full heart. I walked into the hospital with steady steps. The receptionist smiled and called me by name without needing to ask. "You can go up, ma'am." For the first time, I didn't have to ask permission. I didn't have to explain myself. That alone was a miracle. When the door opened, there was Ethan, standing there, eyes full of tears, waiting for me. He hugged me like he hadn't in years. A long, tight hug pulling together all the years of distance. I felt his chest shake, and without letting go, he said, "Your grandson will know who you are. I promise." Those words undid me. I didn't cry, I smiled. It was like all my old silence had finally found a voice. A voice coming from the son I thought I had lost. His embrace brought back memories of when he was little and ran to me after nightmares. That feeling returned, protection, connection, pure love. Only now he was the adult, and still he was my boy. Life turns around, and that day it came full circle. The justice of love was being restored. We stood there with no rush, like time had paused to give us a second chance. I was no longer the woman in the corner. I was a mother. And more than that, I was a grandmother. And what was coming next promised to heal what pain had tried to erase. When I walked into the room, I saw Juliana sitting with the baby in her arms. The scene looked like a painting. Soft light coming through the window, the quiet of the maternity ward surrounding everything. My heart raced. For a second I thought she wouldn't even look at me. But then she lifted her eyes, and for the first time I saw tenderness in them. It wasn't forced. It was real. She motioned to me and gently extended the baby. "Want to hold him?" she asked. Her words felt like a gift. I took that tiny being in my arms and felt the world stop. The smell, the warm little body, the softness, it all hit me at once. It felt like I was holding the continuation of my story. Like love once ignored was now alive in flesh and bone. Juliana looked at me and said, "He's going to grow up knowing his grandmother is made of thread, prayer, and courage." My chest filled up. It wasn't just a pretty phrase. It was a bridge being built. She saw me now as part of the story. As someone who even in silence was essential. That sentence changed everything. The dignity I thought I had lost was coming back. As I rocked my grandson in my arms, I thought of the blanket he never used and how now it finally made sense. He was made of the same threads. Threads of faith, strength, and miracles. My soul, once wounded, felt healed by that moment. There was no pain left, only gratitude. For the chance. For the recognition. For the truth that had finally found its place. Slowly I realized that moment wasn't just mine. It belonged to all the women who have stayed silent too long. And all those who, like me, dared to speak with love, with steadiness, with the calm voice of someone who knows her worth. After that day, everything changed. Not in a big dramatic way, but in the small things that showed I finally belonged. Visits were no longer formal. When I arrived, Ethan smiled and hugged me. Juliana asked for my opinion. And the baby. He already knew my scent. It was different. I was there not because I insisted, but because I was meant to be. The first time I rocked him to sleep was on a Sunday afternoon. He was crying nonstop. I picked him up, sang an old lullaby, and he slowly calmed down. Juliana looked surprised. "How did you do that?" she asked. And I said, "That's called grandma instinct." She laughed. It was a real laugh. That moment sealed something between us. Something new. My presence was no longer tolerated. It was wanted. I didn't have to prove anything anymore. I was seen. And being seen after a lifetime behind the scenes is a gift with no price. Even in the little things, making coffee, watching the baby for a bit, listening to their worries, I felt useful, embraced. Ethan slowly began sharing his fears with me. Juliana opened up about her insecurities as a first-time mom. And I, with all the experience of someone who's lived so much, offered advice without preaching, just truth and hope. My place in the family now had a name: love. My place in the family of not love that demands, love that overflows. What moved me most was knowing this all came not from asking but from standing, from choosing to rise with dignity when everything said to stay silent. And that taught me sometimes silence protects, but sometimes it's your calm, steady voice that saves everything. If you've made it this far, maybe you saw yourself in some part of this. Maybe you too have been silenced, ignored, or pushed aside. Maybe you felt like your story no longer mattered. But I'm here to tell you it does. Your voice has strength. Your pain has worth. And your love, even if unnoticed, is powerful. Sometimes we think we have to endure everything in silence. That it's nobler to give without asking, without speaking, without needing. But there comes a time when silence stops being virtue and becomes self-abandonment. And that's what I learned. That we can love with strength, with faith, with dignity, and still say, "I deserve to be heard." This story isn't just mine. It belongs to many. Women, mothers, grandmothers, daughters, sons. Real people who feel, who hurt, who love. And if something here touched your heart, if any word reminded you of someone, then it was worth telling. Because sharing heals. Listening transforms. And hearing with an open heart saves. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications. That way you'll keep receiving stories like this one, filled with truth, courage, hope, and forgiveness. Stories that remind you you're not alone. That there is always a new beginning. That real love always finds a way. And remember this: sometimes silence is a shield. But other times it's your voice, calm, steady, and true, that opens the doors that once felt locked forever.